In the early 2000s, a young woman in a black turtleneck stepped onto a stage with the calm certainty of a prophet. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes, and she wasn't selling a product. She was selling salvation, a vision of a world where no one would have to fear blood tests again. She promised a revolution: faster, cheaper, painless diagnostics. One drop of blood, she claimed, was enough to test for hundreds of diseases. From cholesterol to cancer, she founded Theranos, a company that promised to make healthcare radically more accessible. Within years, Holmes had become a Silicon Valley superstar. Billionaires lined up to invest. Media moguls and political titans, including former secretaries of state, joined her board. But behind the curtain, none of it was real. This is the rise and devastating fall of Theranos, a company built on deception, sustained by influence, and led by a woman who seduced the world with the illusion of progress. A story not only of fraud, but of faith, fear, and how badly we want to believe. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't just a CEO, she was a narrative. A 19-year-old Stanford dropout quoting Edison and talking about disruption in a voice that didn't quite seem hers. She wore black turtlenecks, used colored lighting in presentations, and designed her office to mirror Apple's aesthetic. She wasn't just imitating Jobs, she was auditioning to replace him. Holmes promised a sleek, compact device called Edison that could analyze blood from a single finger prick. Over 240 tests. No vials, no labs. Just a box on your pharmacy counter. But the Edison was a locked vault, even to most of the people working on it. Inside, it was a mess of malfunctioning parts, ambition duct-taped to delusion. But nearly no one outside, and only a handful inside, realized it didn't work. It had never worked. Inside Theranos, silence was sacred. Employees were kept isolated, sworn to secrecy. Some were fired for asking too many questions. Others quit in despair. The Edison machines generated wildly inconsistent results. But rather than address the problems, Theranos chose to hide them, sometimes blaming lab techs, sometimes the patients themselves. Behind the lab doors, tests were secretly run using commercial analyzers. Results were altered, rebranded, passed off as coming from the Edison. The illusion spread. Walgreens integrated Theranos devices into clinics. The U.S. military explored battlefield applications. The FDA began to take notice, but too slowly. The truth: this was not breakthrough technology. It was a fantasy made flesh. A sci-fi story told in the language of science. In 2015, an anonymous tip landed on the desk of John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. He started digging, and what he found cracked open a myth. Inside Theranos, tension turned toxic. Emails were monitored. Conversations recorded. Some employees signed surveillance agreements. Lawsuits loomed over dissenters, but two refused to be silenced. Tyler Schultz, grandson of board member George Schultz, and Erica Cheung, a young lab tech, both blew the whistle. They faced intimidation, threats, even private investigators. But their testimony was unstoppable. In October 2015, the WSJ report dropped like a bomb. Theranos issued denials. Holmes dismissed it all as a smear campaign from vested interests, but the cracks had turned into fractures. The FDA launched a probe. Walgreens backed out. Lawsuits stacked. Patients shared horror stories of misdiagnosis. By 2016, the empire was crumbling. By 2018, it was gone. Holmes and her coup, Sunny Balwani, were charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes stood before a judge, no longer a visionary, but a convicted felon. She was sentenced to over a decade in prison. But this wasn't just about a CEO. It was about Silicon Valley, a place that glorifies disruption and often forgets accountability. It was about media narratives, about the billions that flow to bold ideas, regardless of feasibility, about investors who didn't ask enough questions. Theranos wasn't the first lie dressed in innovation. It won't be the last. The system that made it possible still thrives, and belief, when weaponized, when unchallenged, isn't hope. It's danger. Today, Theranos is a ghost story whispered in tech boardrooms. But the next Theranos? It's already being born.